Mazel Tov. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone. One thing that I know our people like to do on summer travels to far-off places is to go to visit Jewish synagogues on every continent. Sometimes there aren't even any Jews left in those places, but the synagogues are maintained. And North American Jews often will go to visit. I'm not exactly sure why we do this, but we do this. And you might want to ask yourselves, why do I do this? What is that pull that draws me to look up in the guidebook or on the website, where are the Jewish sites? Where is the Jewish history in this far-off place? And when we go there, we'll see familiar symbols, the Magen David, the Star of David, or the menorah. But one thing we will likely not see, which we do see in North American synagogues, are the flags. You notice the two flags on our bima. That is primarily a North American expression for synagogue Jews. And this week there was an article in the JTA about why this is. My friend and teacher, Dr. Gary Zola, who is the director of the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, Ohio, was quoted as saying he's pursuing this question about how it came to be that North Americans put the flags up on the bima. And it seems it's not an easy story to trace. Flying flags, flag culture, as he calls it, really came in response to when the Star-Spangled Banner was written. And then even more so during World War I. I actually don't know the history of our own flags and our own sanctuaries at Holy Blossom Temple. Maybe our archivists, Michael Cole and Sheila Smolkin, can do some research. Holy Blossom Temple was founded in 1856, so there must be a good story to tell there. But I can tell you that the flags, that as we see them now on our own bima, are very recent, relatively recent, less than 20 years. This has been our practice, and it came out of response to wanting to show solidarity with Israel during the Second Intifada. But of course, we couldn't have only the Israeli flag represented. It needed to be paired together with another country that we love, which we call home, the Canadian flag. What do these flags represent for North American Jewry? You should know that the decision for flags to enter sanctuaries was never an easy decision for congregations. In this article that appeared this past week, which was timed to coincide with July 1st, Canada Day, and with July 4th, of course, we learned that Rabbi Israel Batan, in 1954, ruled that one may hang an American flag in a synagogue only on the grounds that the expression of patriotism is seen as a religious duty. That loving one's country should be a religious expression, not only a patriotic expression. And in 1957, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, the Orthodox legal authority, said that secular symbols like flags have no place in a sanctuary. However, since the display of flags does not violate Jewish law, a congregation is not required to remove them. This is the way a legal authority can give a wink and a nod, saying, you have my blessing to do the practice that you wish. And many congregations took up the flags after the establishment of the State of Israel. That it was a way of pairing our Zionism, our love of the State of Israel, with the love of the Jewish homeland. When we wave a flag, when we salute a flag, when we pledge allegiance to a flag, we are celebrating the independence of a country. And independence is important for countries. So is interdependence important for countries. And in Judaism, interdependence is a higher ideal than independence. For cultures that are descendants of the Hellenistic tradition, perfection is when you no longer depend on anyone, when you achieve and become a self-made man, so to speak. But in our Torah, at the very beginning, it is written that it is not good for man to be alone. God says, Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado. It is not good for a person to be alone. Human beings are by definition interdependent, incomplete by ourselves. The Greek ideal is intellectual perfection when you liberate yourself from relationships that distract and demand your attention. But the Jewish ideal is relational perfection. Therefore, we are to acknowledge that we are vulnerable when we are alone, that we depend on others, and that others are vulnerable and depend on us. This is a great teaching for a bar mitzvah. Interdependence. As you grow, Harrison, don't think for a moment that the ideal is to be independent. Not from your family, not from your congregation, not from the Jewish people. The goal is to be interdependent. To be a whole person, one has to give up the quest for self-sufficiency and acknowledge the need to love and to be loved. Our Bible teaches us to accept dependency as a permanent, positive feature of the human condition. Our Torah teaches that even God is dependent, so to speak. God needs humanity to be in covenantal relationship. And so we should not be ashamed to admit dependency. Judaism promotes healthy interdependence over the exaggerated Greek desire for independence. That is true for countries. That is certainly true for individual human beings. Think of the words of the Canadian national anthem. We call upon God. It's actually a prayer woven into that anthem. God, keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. In those two lines, what are we saying? Please, God, do your part, and we too will do our part. Just in those two lines alone, we see there is interdependency. How can a country be blessed through God's blessing and through our own efforts to stand on guard? The master poet of medieval Spain, Solomon ibn Gabirol, wrote about God, "You are one, echad, singular. You are one, you are exalted above abasement and falling, not like human beings who fall when alone." It's beautiful poetry, but it is not the dominant Jewish view. The dominant Jewish view throughout the collection, the vast collection of teachings, say that God is not diminished in power. God is, in fact, less effective when left alone. We believe that God needs a partner, that God wants desperately not to be left alone. The word echad can be translated to mean singular, as in one and only, unique in all the universe. Echad can be translated to point to the eternality of God's existence. That is, God is infinite. God is ultimate. God is once and for all time. Echad can also be understood to mean unified, that God is one whole, indivisible, as we say in the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag, one God, indivisible. That is to say, while human beings may perceive God as having many conflicting attributes and roles, all of these, in fact, belong to one complete and total God. Echad has been translated also with an eye towards God's relationship with the world. That is to mean God is alone, or even God is lonely. Could it be lonely at the top? I once visited a Shiva home when the recently widowed woman was struggling with her loss and her own mortality, and struggling too with God. She recalled a childhood memory which haunted her even at this late stage of her life. Her mother had instructed her, "Don't ever give up on God. You need God, and God needs you." This is a very Jewish teaching from mother to daughter. But as a young girl, and still now as an elderly woman, this congregant was horrified by the thought. So horrified she had to sleep in the chair by her mother's bedside that night. She asked herself over and over again, what could God possibly need from me? The ancient rabbinic sage Abaye used to say, "Let love for God be spread through your actions." If a person studies well and enables others to do so, if one is decent and trustworthy in business, what will people say of him? Have you seen the behavior of so-and-so who lives by Torah? How beautiful, how admirable, what a fine person. Therefore, Isaiah teaches, "You are my servant, people Israel. I will be glorified through you." In this way, the master, with a capital M, is dependent on the servants. God's glory, if we dare say, depends on how we human beings of flesh and blood live out our days and our years. This is the task of every Jew. Could it be that God, quote unquote, needs us to walk and talk in such a way as to magnify God's presence in the world? Could it be that God, quote unquote, relies on us to live in such a way as to call attention to God's goodness? Could it be that God depends upon us to stand or to sit and recite the Shema and testify to God's oneness, God's onlyness? Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory warns that depending on another must not be mistaken for a sign of weakness. We learned at the foot of Mount Sinai that interdependence is the goal. That is the interdependence day of the Jewish people when we stood at Sinai. In God's abounding love, we were invited into the covenantal relationship to contribute to God's greatness. Rabbi Hartman recalls the early rabbinic tradition of reciting the Ten Commandments together with the Shema. That practice allowed us to relive that moment at Sinai, of declaring our interdependence, God and the Jewish people. God said to us, "Shema Yisrael, listen, please listen to me." And we responded with the word Nishma, yes, we are listening. We hear you. Hartman comments, there is the need of lovers to share with each other the situations of vulnerability that either may experience. When you discuss your needs in a loving relationship, you do not necessarily expect your beloved to solve your problems. Reassurance and comfort may be gained simply through knowing that your beloved is listening to you in your anguish, and knowing that you are not alone. God is always one, but never entirely independent. It could be said that at Sinai, God was no longer alone. At this time of year, during the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, one of the darkest days, the darkest day on the Jewish calendar, we ask the same question that the young girl once asked herself: what could God possibly need of me? On Tisha B'Av, we confront that sometimes God can be distant or even seem to be cut off, leaving us alone. But we also can learn from this trying time in the Jewish calendar that the covenantal relationship of interdependence can be restored, and we can reclaim the responsibility to protect God from the dangers of being unknown, of being ignored or forgotten. We recommit to take up the mitzvot, to rescue God from the oblivion of irrelevance. This is the urgency behind the command, Shema, listen. For God's sake, let us hear. And on Tisha B'Av, we will pray as we draw near to God, restoring that relationship, acknowledging our interdependence. We say, Hayeh na karov, please God, draw near to us as we draw near to you, and answer us when we cry out, Yihi na chastecha, please let your loyalty come in response to our acts of chesed and be our comfort. Answer even before we call.